Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So one of the occasional pleasant little ironies of running a channel called Kubrick Corner is the chance to talk about either Stanley Kubrick films directly or when a new property is related to a previous Stanley Kubrick movie. In the case of this review, it's the latter. I'm here to talk about Doctor Sleep, which is the new horror movie that acts as the sequel to both the novel of The Shining, written by Stephen King back in 1977, and the ensuing 1980 Stanley Kubrick adaptation, which famously changed a lot of the emphasis of the novel to Stephen King's immense dislike. He famously didn't like what Kubrick had done to what was fundamentally a story of addiction and psychological collapse. But that's not to say that both properties can't stand on their own as a valid piece of art. I certainly believe they can. So now in 2019 we have Doctor Sleep, which is directed by Mike Flanagan, of whose work I am very, very fond. He's done things like Oculus with Karen Gillan. He did the Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House, based on Shirley Jackson's sort of groundbreaking haunted house novel, which was terrific. He's also done things like Hush and Absentia. Really, really good horror director. Very interesting, gets good performances out of his actors. And he's spoken at length with regards to this film as how difficult it was to both honour the spirit of Kubrick's very, very famous movie adaptation of The Shining, and also Stephen King's wishes, because as I said, Stephen King didn't like what Stanley Kubrick had done with his property, and Flanagan had to basically sort of continue the aesthetic principle of what Kubrick had done while also honouring the original source material. And this has presented a very, very interesting challenge. He finally got Stephen King on board with it. King has tweeted out his approval of this new movie. So just to fill you in, it picks up sort of several decades after the events of The Shining, in which we had young Danny, played by Danny Lloyd, escape from his maniacal father Jack, who was played by Jack Nicholson at the Overlook Hotel. Jack, of course, had been sort of driven mad through a combination of isolation and apparently sort of supernatural happenings at the hotel. Although, of course, the film is very, very ambiguous and can be read in very, very many different ways. Not least of which that final shot of Jack Nicholson in the photograph, which throws out all of these kind of contradictory ambiguities, the sort of ambiguities that Kubrick loved and revelled in. He didn't want people to be able to put one particular stamp on the movie. That was one of the things that King didn't like about the film, incidentally. So you pick up with the older Danny, now played by Ewan McGregor, who is consumed by alcoholism, who is basically living this itinerant lifestyle, moving from place to place, constantly haunted by his past and afflicted by his shining abilities, basically the psychic abilities that allow him to sort of reach out to other people psychically, and also the ability to sort of, be able to portend what might be about to happen in certain circumstance. We saw this to incredibly chilling effect in the Kubrick movie, which was really, really, really terrifying, and which exerted obviously a very kind of surreal, paranoid atmosphere, largely through the fact that a lot of it took place in bright light. One of the many brilliant things about The Shining, which I don't think is a perfect film, is the fact that it subverted those horror conventions by bringing that most primal of horrors, what would happen if a family member turned against you, into bright light, which is kind of the inverse of what we expect from a lot of horror movies. One of the many genius things that Kubrick did with that movie. So, and now we have the older Danny, again, as I said, sort of confronting his alcoholism, confronting his personal demons, who runs into a young girl called Abra, played by Kylie Curran, who also shares a shining ability. And they both come sort of under threat from the pervasive menace of this cult called the True Knot cult, headed up by Rose the Hat, played with a great deal of relish by Rebecca Ferguson, who basically seeks to harness the shine from people. She can sense when people have got this ability, and basically by taking it out of people who have shining, she becomes sort of stronger and to an extent immortal. As a result, there is a bit of sort of contradictory information as to what this actually does to these various members. So there's basically a triangular struggle that takes place at the centre of the story. The Doctor Sleep of the title refers to Danny himself, because he is able to, at one point he becomes an orderly at a hospital, and he is able to console people in their final moments as they're about to die, because he can obviously see when their time is up, and he is able to sort of calm them and keep them quiet. But clearly, the influence of The Shining has some positive effects, but it also has a lot of negative connotations as well, and it has a lot of terrifying connotations. And so you get this battle brewing between these three characters. And I think the first thing to say is that it's clear that The Shining, the 1980 movie of The Shining, was demonstrably a Stanley Kubrick movie. That was more a Stanley Kubrick movie than it was a Stephen King movie. Kubrick changed a lot of stuff in the book, to the extent that King went off and did this really crappy 1997 TV movie with Rebecca De Mornay, which stopped true to the novel, which was absolutely terrible, hamstrung by non-existent budget and really, really bad acting. So there is that. And I think, for better or worse, this new adaptation of Doctor Sleep is a Stephen King movie, whereas The Shining was a Kubrick movie. This is a Stephen King movie with all the good and bad that entails. So the good stuff is that there are a lot of it does loop the story back round to what King's novel of The Shining was originally about, which is it was a story about alcoholism and about inner demons, and about how does that manifest through this kind of external sort of supernatural psychic ability. I think that is interesting, and that I think is well handled. I also think there are some very, very good performances from Kylie Curran as the young girl, and also again Rebecca Ferguson, who is really sort of not so much eating the scenery as sucking the scenery up through her mouth and through her nostrils, and she's having a lot of fun with it. I think Rebecca Ferguson is a great actress, and certainly, if you've seen the trailer, you might imagine that a great deal of the movie actually places an emphasis on the bit when they go back to the Overlook Hotel, which is famously one of the most terrifying locations ever in a film. That only occupies the last quarter of the movie, and that, I won't go into too much detail about it, but that is really well done. The production design is really well done. The way they've taken the look of the hotel and they've made it like mouldering and festering, but you get a sense that latent evil is still there, is really good, and that provides much of the dramatic fireworks, most of which I have to say are unfortunately absent from the preceding three quarters of the movie, because I have to say I found a lot of Doctor Sleep quite laboured and quite boring. And I don't think any of this is the fault of Mike Flanagan, because as I've said, he's directed many things that I've liked in the past. I think the problem is that he is working with substandard source material that is classic Stephen King, which is it throws out too many characters across too many locations, and there are too many subplots which are all thrown into this great mess within the first half an hour of the movie that I ended up being confused. Like, hang on a minute, so where are we geographically? Where are we emotionally? Where's this character? Who's that character? There's a lot of stuff going on, not unlike a lot of the criticisms that were directed at the recent It Chapter 2, which I actually quite liked, although it was very flawed. But I think, unfortunately, Mike Flanagan has inherited those worst kind of Stephen King tendencies, which is there is a tendency to bloat out the story with too many characters, with too much stuff going on. There is also a kind of unashamed embrace of those very silly Stephen King tropes. I mean, you've got things, as I said, you've got like actual, in stark contrast to the sort of plausible realism of The Shining, which was about a father going mad, which is something that we can all believe in. This has got depictions of souls being sucked out through people's mouths. It's got astral projection. It's got a lot of the silly stuff that unfortunately plays to the more hokey end of the Stephen King canon, and consequently what this did was it actually made me appreciate what Kubrick did with The Shining a lot more, although it was probably quite clear that he had a certain degree of contempt for Stephen King's book. In the end, and I don't like to say this, I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing. I think by junking a lot of the stuff in the novel, which I thought was very flawed, the movie of The Shining emerged as its own sort of new entity, but a better entity, I thought. Not a perfect one. The Shining is a very flawed movie, but I think it emerged as something stronger. Unfortunately, I think with this, it sticks close to the. I get the impression that it sticks very close to the source. I haven't read the book. I know people that have and rate it very, very highly, but I've read enough Stephen King books to know that he, as an author, he has a lot of problems with narrative discipline, with the amount of characters, with plausibility, and very often just with wrapping up his narratives. There is often a problem that you, as a reader, you end up getting exhausted before the end of it, and unfortunately, I kind of did get exhausted with this. Although, ironically enough, the last part of this movie is I felt the strongest part of it. I did find myself sort of twitching my thumbs a little bit, thinking, okay, when is this going to kick into gear? I mean, it's very much a horror movie in the modern age. There are a lot of like sort of shrieky, jumpy moments, whereas the beauty of Kubrick's vision was that The Shining was not like that. It was very, very kind of understated. It used this incredibly discombobulating combination of steady cam shots and production design and those classical music staples by the likes of like Bartok and Ligeti to create this really menacing atmosphere. Doctor Sleep, the movie, is very much a conventional kind of, okay, build long periods of silence, build to a loud noise, and then reset the pieces for like the next set piece, which again becomes kind of predictable, and as I've said before, makes me appreciate the sort of twisted atmosphere that Kubrick managed to bring to the earlier movie. So, and I also think there's a bit of a problem. There's a bit of a void at the centre of the movie with the main character played by Ewan McGregor. And Ewan McGregor can be a really good actor in certain things, but the problem is I didn't get invested in Danny as a character. I didn't really get a sense of that torment. Although the movie makes a great amount of noise about how tormented he is, I couldn't help but think, what if an actor, someone like Michael Shannon, had played this? Someone who really, has got a reputation for playing sort of, psychologically sort of tortured characters, and what that might have done for the dramatic meat of the story. It's not to say McGregor's performance is bad. I just think that the writing of the character is somewhat bland, and indeed a lot of the movie I thought was rather bland. Despite the quotations from the Newton brothers on the soundtrack, that there's a certain reprise of the Dizzy Ray opening music which do provoke a little bit of a frisson. And as I said, the bits where they go back to the hotel, it does send the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. Although I did face myself, I had a troubling question facing myself, which is this scary because Doctor Sleep is working on its own terms, or is it scary because it's reminding me of a superior film that was a lot more terrifying? And I still haven't quite made up my mind on that. So I noticed Doctor Sleep is getting a lot of good reviews from a lot of people. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm more of a sort of 2.5, 3-star movie. There are a lot of good things about it. For me, I felt a lot of it fell quite flat, which is a shame because I'm invariably a fan of Mike Flanagan's stuff, and often Stephen King, despite the fact that I think a lot of his books kind of flail around all over the place ineffectually. So it's out in the UK in time for Halloween on the 31st of October, and I'd really like to know what you think of it. Drop me a comment here at Kubrick Corner, and I'll see you soon. Bye.